Welcome to another episode of Teacher Talk. The Teacher, a Mail and Guardian publication, provides information and resources for teachers nationally. Xolani Majola is a regular contributor to this publication. At Future Ed 2012, he was a special guest speaker and shared his views on teaching with love and care. In this presentation, Xolani spoke fondly of his days as a teacher. Today we will see how these experiences can be put to use in every class to ensure a positive experience for both the educator and the learner.
I want to address the whole issue of teaching with love, care, and respect. I know when this topic was put up, a lot of people were saying, what exactly does that mean? So I'll try and keep it as simple as possible. Earlier on when I spoke, I made references to the thinking right now that teachers, by their very nature, our profession, when I say teachers, I'm talking about myself as well, that we are one of the most underrated profession in the world, if I can dare say that. Whenever you talk about teachers, it's like, okay, not good enough like a doctor would be. But philosophically speaking, and I kept thinking to myself, will we ever, as South Africans, have a situation where our profession is given the dignity that I think it deserves? Because at the moment when you talk about teaching, people are thinking strikes, people are thinking all sorts of negative political things. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in what each one of us does when they stand in front of the kids, when they are with the kids. And I jotted down a couple of things here which I wanted to specifically focus on. And one of them was setting the scene.
Xolani had a rough start on his first day. 25 young grade 4 children attended his class that morning. Not long after he had greeted them, they started crying. He wondered why. Let's go find out what happened.
I couldn't understand. Why are these kids crying? You know? And then I had to walk around the class and try and calm this one down. And then whilst I was doing that, the one at the back would scream at the top of his lungs. And then I'll rush there. It took me about 20 minutes to get the whole thing going. But then I realized that maybe I need to ask them why they were crying. I did. Kids, why are you crying? And then they said to me, say you're a man. And I said to them, of course I'm a man. You know, I cannot be anything else. I didn't realize at that time that they were straight from grade 3. And all their lives up to that point, they had been taught by female teachers. And obviously, female teachers apply different methodologies. The attitude is different, the character as well. And then when suddenly I came to class, grade 4, I'm a guy, and morning class, you know. In retrospect, I'm thinking, yeah, maybe I may have scared them a little because maybe of the sound of my voice, my mannerism as a man.
Xolani realized that he had not set the scene conducive to a welcoming, comfortable learning environment. His female colleagues said his class looked empty, dull, and gray. They suggested that pictures on the walls would have made the children feel more at home.
And then the more I spoke with my colleagues, the more I realized that what I should have done indeed was to create an environment that was welcoming to the kids. And created an atmosphere, an ethos that said, you are welcome in this class. I didn't do that. I had assumed that simply by having the basics, I had the chalkboard, I have the overhead projector, I had desks. So I thought for me that was enough. And now that I think about it, it's something that I've never forgotten because thereafter, every year, I would make sure that before the kids came to my class, I would go there a day before or 2 days before and make sure and sit by myself in class and try and get the feel of what it was like to be in my own class, then I realized that in terms of the atmosphere, before you can even venture into creating it, you yourself, as an educator, you need to look at yourself. And I've been saying this for quite some time now, that when you as a teacher walk into class, you walk into class as a teacher. You don't walk into class as your social being. In other words, you don't come into class thinking about the rates that you haven't paid for. You don't come into class thinking about the cell phone contract that you haven't paid for. You know, you walk into class purely as a teacher to perform that education requirement. I even made an example of you as a teacher changing into some kind of a superhero character, like Batman, for instance. During the day, he is Bruce Wayne, a businessman. At night, he's a superhero, he's saving lives. So he's got two personalities. The teacher as well is supposed to do that. When you walk into the class, become sir if you are sir, and become ma'am if you are ma'am. Become someone that those kids will relate to with ease and understanding. So part of setting the scene is exactly that, looking at yourself and saying to yourself, am I ready to do this? If I do, how will my kids respond to it? Is the environment conducive enough for learning to actually take place? So before you walk into the class, you have a couple of reflective questions that you need to ask yourself. Because you, as a teacher yourself, you need to be ready for the practice of teaching. And one of the most important thing about setting the scene is that at the end of the day, when kids go home, they need to leave with wonderful experiences of that particular day. I made earlier an example of what it was like when I was in grade 6, you know, in the early 1980s. We had this one particular teacher who taught us Afrikaans. I said to the group here before that on Monday, he was a totally different character than on Friday. Than he was on Friday, and then he was when it was payday. If you didn't do your homework on Monday, definitely. Well, in those days, you know, the stick was still used. It was a daily habit that if you didn't do something right, then you'll get a hiding, you know, and we sort of grew to understand that. But then if your homework wasn't done on Friday, obviously we would finish off earlier than the normal days for whatever reason. So he would be in good spirits. And if you didn't do your homework, he will even talk to you, but never on a Monday. Never on a Monday, you know. So we wouldn't know exactly what to expect when it was his lessons. We would first look at him and try and measure the temperature. Is it too hot? You know, is it too cold? And I think back and say to myself, as a teacher, I would never want my kids, I always call them my kids, you know, because it becomes too personal when I teach. I would never want my kids to be afraid of me. I should be at school, I should be the first person they run to and say, sir, we need to talk, you know? So when I taught, I tried by all means to do things differently, to do things in a way that was new and fresh at the time. Because I started teaching when I was 21. You know, when I turned 21, I had a job as a teacher. So some of the kids, they would look at me and think, you know, he's really not that old. And they'll take their chances until they realize who they were dealing with. Because there were times when I had to be firm, not harsh, but firm, to say, I need this done. And that's it, non-negotiable. And they understood that. Right, so in terms of setting the scene, it's something you do personally, to prepare yourself for the responsibility that you have ahead of you. Brand your teaching. What do I mean by that? I made an example of a product, Coca-Cola. That imagine if a Coca-Cola that you bought in Cape Town, tasted differently to a Coca-Cola that you bought in Gauteng? What would that say about the brand Coca-Cola? Inconsistent, right? So as a teacher, children need to experience you in one way only. When they think of you, they need to think of you in a particular way, right? In other words, the image they have of you, it has to be the same, whether you've been teaching for 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. Unlike our teacher, when we were taught, we didn't know what we were dealing with. And then as a result, we didn't trust him. And we didn't want to trust him because you weren't exactly sure what that meant. Whereas if you are the kind of teacher that is kind, if you are kind, you have got to be kind for the entire duration of your teaching practice. You cannot be kind in 2012 and only to be something else in 2013. Are you with me? A kind teacher is kind forever. A creative teacher is creative forever. You can't be creative today and then tomorrow you're not. You can't be welcoming today and then next year you are something else altogether. So it's very important to be consistent in your practice, to be consistent in your behavior, to be consistent in your temperament, to be consistent even when you use different resources for whatever reason, right? And then I made an example where I said, teaching is like baking a cake. When I said this, they thought, you know, the group earlier on, they were so keen. What do you mean by that? And I tried to put it that way. I tried to put it this way. First of all, for you to bake a cake, I did say that earlier that the ladies would immediately understand what are the ingredients. There are core ingredients that you need when you bake a cake. Otherwise, you can't have a cake if you don't have them. Eggs, milk, flour, sugar. And the parents provide us with those core ingredients. They give us their kids as they are, put them to school. And then primary school, that's where all the mixing takes place. How many eggs you're going to put, when, and how to put the mixture together so that it is good to go into the oven. And high school is where the actual baking takes place. The high school teachers, they monitor the temperature to make sure that it's not too hot, and it's not too low, the temperature. Because if it goes towards either extreme, then it will damage the product. And once those kids graduate from high school to tertiary, any tertiary, at tertiary level, they're not worried about the contents. How much sugar is there, how much salt, what you didn't put, or what you did put. All they are worried about is to put icing on the cake and get it ready to be sold into the world of work. That's what they do. So every step in terms of education is important. Every phase is important. Primary school teachers, including pre-primary, they play a crucial role in the development of children. Because my thinking has always been, it is very difficult to repair an adult, and costly too, when you could have done that earlier when they were young. That's why when you hear that children, in terms of the annual national assessment, they are failing basics, when children cannot read and write, never mind speaking, then as a teacher, I get upset, because I am thinking to myself, those kids at that level, they are being denied their basic human right to read, to write, to speak, to reason even. Then when they leave us in primary and go to high school, then definitely you must know that you've had an input whether it was positive or negative, to those kids. You know, it's either those kids are going to thank you when they finish school, or they're going to curse you when they finish school.
Xolani asked the question, what should the ideal classroom be like? The answers from the audience included that it should include pictures relevant to the learners, an environment where learners are encouraged to broaden their perspective, their mindset, encourage the learners to ask questions. The class should be user-friendly, engage most of the senses, a place where learners can feel safe, love, hugs, maternal, paternal attention. Xolani shares his advice.
I used to have a greeting time where we would take 5 to 10 minutes every single day before I could do anything. Everyone would walk around the class, shaking hands, asking each other how they were. And let me tell you, because I did that, it set such a good tone for the day. It set such a good tone for my lessons before they even began, because it broke the ice, as one of the people said here, you know. And a lot of them would come to me and ask me how I felt, because they were so interested in me as a person. Because I remember in our days, a teacher was someone that was, you know, highly regarded. And a teacher was never wrong. Well, in our days, a teacher was never wrong. I remember when I told my kids for the first time that I didn't know an answer to a question they asked me, they were disappointed. You could tell that these kids were traumatized, actually. How can Sir not know? How? Sir, but why are we coming to class if you don't know? Straight after that, we had a long discussion. It took up most of my my teaching time, but I didn't care, because I needed to explain to them that when you teach, it doesn't mean that you know everything, you know. And I actually encouraged them to find stuff that I didn't know. And sometimes before class would start, a child who had been reading an encyclopedia about something, they'll ask me straight away, say, "Do you know what is?" And sometimes I wouldn't even know what is it that they were talking about. But for the mere fact that they actually went home and did work and researched stuff, I was happy about that. I wasn't too much worried about me not knowing. I was happy for the fact that they went home and they did some work.
The ideal classroom for Xolani is a place where children are inspired to learn, they are motivated, and are supported by their educators. Support to all children, not just those who are struggling. He put down 3 exercises that were the core of his ideal classroom. Consistency always has excellent results. The spirit of togetherness is essential for effective communication from both the educator and the learner. Respect was an integral part of this concept.
First of all, respect. And they would never speak in a way that would actually put them into trouble with me. They would always be, "Excuse me, sir. Please, sir." You know, if it was a ma'am, it was excuse me, ma'am. Please, ma'am. May I? You know, just teaching them the basic communication skills. And it was through that spirit of togetherness that I was actually able to hold my kids together. Because if Xolani had an issue with Utabo, Xolani would put up his hand and say, "Sir, can we have a spirit of togetherness maybe after the lesson or even before the lesson started?" And I'll say, "Fine." And then they'll tell me, "Sir, I have issues with this boy because he did this and that and that and that. He spoke to the other teacher in this way, right?" So that actually allowed me to create an open environment where children could actually interact with one another, right? And that's why it was called the spirit of togetherness. And then there was the post box, something similar to this, but it would be a cardboard, and one would have, I would have a monitor. It was somebody's responsibility to run the post box. And every morning and every afternoon, just before school started or before school ended, they would put in their letters here, addressed to me anonymously, because then it would give them an opportunity to say everything they wanted to say without me knowing who they were. Well, I suppose like any other system, there were loopholes, because then grade 7 boys, obviously, you know, being teenagers, because I was in grade 7 by the time I was doing this. I started doing it from grade 4, and I went up with my class right up to grade 7. And in grade 7, boys who were shy and, you know, and then they'll just throw stuff into my inbox, a letter to say, because they called me, during this time, they would call me Auntie Say, you know, as in Auntie Dolly, you know, the agony column, Sis Dolly, dear Sis Dolly. They'll say, Auntie Say, I will not reveal my name, but I think I'm in love with so-and-so, you know, and I had to read this, and I would. Right, class, we have a problem here. One of the students is in love with so-and-so. So-and-so, how do you feel about this attention? No, I don't like him. Do you know who he is? No, I don't. But it gave us an opportunity. For me, I use those particularly for my English lessons, particularly looking at speech, you know, and they would speak after that. When I would say to them, right, guys, please, can you advise Anonymous on what to do? And they would come up with all sorts of creative answers to whatever the problem was. It was such a fun activity. I enjoyed it. And then birthday notices. If it was my birthday or if it was your birthday, we would never start class until we've sang a song for you. And I would begin as a teacher in a class and say, right, guys, today it's Nomfundo's birthday. And I would like to say this about Nomfundo, and then I'll go on, because I knew that if I had started, I would then set the right tone for them to actually follow. And then I'll say all the wonderful things about Nomfundo, and then I'll open it up to the class. And each child would say something nice about Nomfundo on that particular day. They were not allowed to say anything other than nice. If they do say something that was unacceptable on somebody's birthday, then I'll take them outside and ask them to chill for 10 minutes, you know, and come back when they were nice. If they were not, they'll still go outside. So those 3 activities, I realized over a period of 8 years of using them, just how much they actually added into the spirit of the class, to such an extent that I created an environment that allowed even the most shy child to learn to speak. When today, because a lot of kids that I taught back then in 96, they've now finished varsity, you know. Some are even married. It's a funny thing. I've been invited to their graduate, because I moved up with them from grade 4 up until grade 7. We developed a very good relationship, even when they went to high school, even after high school. Most of them are now on my Facebook as friends. And it is very interesting to talk to them at a different level. And I'll always remind them, remember when you couldn't spell? Remember when you didn't understand what photosynthesis was? And right now, a lot of them are doing things that I really don't know. When you ask a child, what are you doing? And they'll give you some scientific-based name, and I'm thinking, and they'll laugh at me and say, sir, look now who we have to teach. And it's me, you know. So when you teach, a real teacher understands that what you have in front of you are not just statistics. You don't have 40 kids. You don't have 50 kids. You don't have 25 kids. You have 25 human beings right in front of you. Just because they are younger and just because they haven't grown up to your age, it doesn't mean they are not human. It doesn't mean that they don't feel the pain. They don't get excited, you know? Because one thing I know about teaching, we are one of the few professions where in a day, just one day, on a Monday, we use all our emotions, all of them. If you've been a teacher and you've never gotten angry in one day, excited at the same time, sad, then you haven't taught. Because a child would say something wonderful, and whilst you're celebrating that, and then another one at the back says something that will just make you want to scream. You know, and whilst you're attending to that, and then this one will tell you, sir, so-and-so is crying because she's lost his mom or his dad, and then you have to attend to that. So as a teacher, you go home, you are absolutely tired. I remember I'll come home to my wife and I would not want to speak because I would have been speaking for the whole day. And teachers, again, this is one area which they forget, their leadership role. When you design a lesson, it's because you have a vision of where you would like to take your kids, right? And that, for me, is one form of leadership, where you give direction. Not just give direction. You give, you show, you support kids as they pursue that direction. A teacher is a facilitator. That's why I was confident enough to say to them, I don't know. Because part of my responsibility is not to know everything, but perhaps it is to point learners towards the right direction where they are likely to discover new knowledge. You may not be an expert on it. You don't have to be. But at least you need to have enough vision and courage to move with your kids towards that direction. And we forget the value that we add on learners, simply because I think there is a tendency right now to underestimate our own value as teachers. I was talking to somebody here before, and he said, how do I deal with what is going on in my school? You know, if you look around other schools, things are just not happening. Teachers leave school early, they do this and they do. And I said to him, you know, the most important thing right now, it is for you to take care of the environment where you exist. It is for you to take care of the environment where you have influence. Because you're not going to control what the next school is doing, but definitely you can control what is going on in your own school. Over and above that, as a teacher, you may not really control grade 12A, but if grade 12B is your class, then definitely you will control that class. If you go to A, you will control A. Are you with me? So I think as teachers, one important thing that we have got to learn today is the whole issue of taking pride in what we do. If you became a teacher by default, meaning there was not anything else you could have done, you know, except teaching, then you're in the wrong profession.
Although Xolani no longer participates in the classroom as an educator, he keeps his passion for education alive by presenting training seminars as well as workshops on teacher development and teaching techniques.